where we give condoms to college kids or whatever, they have lower abortion rates. But broadly speaking, over the past 60 years, we've had a proliferation of contraception, and we've had a proliferation of abortion. The rates have spiked, and they've lowered it sometimes, but they've remained fairly high. And the reason is more fundamental than statistics, which is that we have a mentality now that sex can come without consequences. And so condoms can be very effective, and whatever like women put inside themselves, and that can be very effective too. But sometimes it's not. And by accepting the mentality that sterile sex is a right, it then implies a right to kill the baby, so you don't actually have to face the consequences when it happens.
I think I push back on the idea that like people were not having sex prior to contraception, because
I never suggested that.
Okay, I thought it was suggested, because when you're saying like, oh no, abortion rates have gone up since contraception, I'm not sure if that's true.
They were having kids before contraception.
And they were also getting abortions before
No. I mean, the other reason why it's, I think, silly to try to separate these two phenomena is they occurred basically at the same time. So you had legal abortion beginning in 1973 with Roe v. Wade, though it had been legalized in other states prior. This was, the 1960s and 1970s, the sexual revolution, when contraception became much, much, much more popular and available, and abortion did at the same time too. So it's simply a fact. As contraception became more popular, the abortion rate went up. Now you might say, well, those are disconnected phenomena. Okay, maybe they are, but they certainly occurred at the same time.
At least to my understanding, and maybe we can even search this up right now, people did have abortions, or did have a high rate of abortion before even like Roe v. Wade. What would happen is that they were like more like back alley abortions, illegal abortions, such abortions that like basically put the mother's life in danger.
No, none of that's true. They were having abortions. It wasn't at a particularly high rate. The rate spiked after Roe v. Wade. And it is true sometimes women died from back alley abortions. There's a fake statistic that went around that was cooked up by the abortion industry, which said that thousands of women a year were dying of abortions just before Roe v. Wade. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was the head of NARAL, the Abortion Rights League, admitted they just made that statistic up out of thin air. And we can fact check it because we have the statistics from the CDC. So the year before Roe v. Wade made abortion legal nationally, do you know how many women died of back alley abortions?
I don't have a specific number from the top of my head.
39 is the number. And do you know how many women died of legal abortions? 24. And so almost the same, but you'd say, well, it's a little bit higher for the illegal abortions, except that if you look at the number of states that had legal abortion versus illegal abortion, if you control for that variability, it comes out to almost exactly the same number. And it was a very, very low number. So, that wouldn't be a recommendation of legal abortion.
To my understanding right now, if we decide to let's take a state or a county where one county has a greater amount of contraceptive access, promotes it more, teaches kids about contraceptive use, versus a county that there isn't that necessarily same level of sex education, the one that has the less amount of sex education and contraceptive access would have higher amounts of abortion. Do you dispute that?
The one that has higher, did you say the one that has higher rates of sex education would have higher rates of abortion?
No, the one that has higher rates of sex education and higher rates of contraceptive use will have less abortions than the one where there is no sex ed. Basically, places that have less sex ed have higher abortions.
Well, it depends. It depends on if we're talking about a community that is strongly discourages contraception and premarital sex and abortion, that would be less likely. If we're talking about a community that has very low rates of religiosity and low rates of getting married, but also low rates of sex education, which is just kind of liberal sexual revolution teaching, then maybe you would have higher rates of abortion there. I don't dispute that at all. I mean, we live in a culture now that is broadly supportive of abortion and of contraception, including religious communities. But if you, to use my own group of religious people, if you look at Catholics compared to the rest of the country, and then if you look at traditional Catholics, guys who like the Latin Mass and smells and bells compared to regular Catholics, the rates of divorce plummet, the rates of abortion plummet, the rates of contraceptive use plummet, the rates of childbirth go through the roof. And so the reason I pick that group out more than the others is they seem to have all of the pieces that I'm talking about here, and whereas others, they might have one but not two, or they might have three, and so there it's much harder to compare.
How do you make people more Catholic?
Well, I'm doing my best, aren't I?
Yeah, you are.
I'm doing my very
But
best.
if it doesn't work, what's your plan B? Because it seems like...
No, look, even beyond, if someone says, well, Michael, I agree with a lot of what you say, but I'm not a Catholic or something. Okay, fine. All I'm doing is stating the truth as I see it, as clearly and often as I can. And, that led me to certain conclusions. I hope it leads them to the same ones. But if people are if first they recognize that the truth exists and that we have faculties of reason that can be knowable, that's good. And if people recognize that there are better things and worse things, and we can do better things and worse, that's good. And if people recognize that having self-discipline is good and will lead to a more happy life, then I'm very happy about that. And down the line, maybe I haven't
Is
convinced...
that not what people are doing right now? Like, you don't think people
No.
are, you think people, like, it is the fact that people actually think it is better for the well-being of society to not stigmatize, like, gay marriage. They believe that. Now,
I don't think there's any such thing as gay marriage, 'cause I think it gets back to the feminist problem, which is I think marriage either has sexual difference at the heart of it, or it just doesn't mean anything. It's just another group of people.
So then why don't you let them get married by the state if it just doesn't mean anything?
It's not up to me. Marriage either means the union of a man and a woman, the complementary sexes, for the good of the spouses, sure, and for the creation of children, for the creation of a family, or it's just like your buddy.
But you said
your
truth
buddy who
is
you do
just what's
something weird with.
beneficial. Let's say it's beneficial as a society to recognize those marriages. It creates less turmoil, whatever. Then is it true and is it good?
Let's say, is it beneficial to recognize a vegan lion? It's just not real. And so we can pretend. Is it beneficial to pretend that a man is a woman? I don't know. He might think it is for a short period of time, but it's not. I mean, this is one of the problems, really, with the proliferation of porn and other vices and the drugs and all that stuff, is it causes people to lose perhaps what little control of their reason they previously had. I mean, this is one of the really bad problems about all porn, OnlyFans included, but obviously the big industrial stuff too, is it appeals most basically to the prurient interest. The thing that it does is arouses people. And listen, none of you are women. You're all women. I'm not a woman. And none of you are men. I'll speak from the male perspective. I think I'm relatively reasonable. Relatively, at least. I think I'm but
Pretty reasonable.
pretty reasonable.
Do you think
Pretty
all
reasonable.
reasonable people would necessarily come to your conclusions?
Yes. But at least to a lot of them. But I will tell you this. If I am in a state of, passionate excitement, if, this is why I don't look at these things. But if a man were to look at those things, he would lose control of his reason very, very quickly. And that's degrading. Even taking the actions outside of it, to have an industry out there, the purpose of which is to make men less reasonable and to do things that can be destructive to themselves or to their families or to whatever, is not going to lead to a flourishing society.
We all have
I
sex
just hate
drives, though.
that,
That's
like-
just true. If you could
Yeah.
eliminate sex drives from people.
No, we all have sex. But there's a. I'm not.
Are you
saying,
reasonable when you're having sex with your wife in that
I
moment?
think I am actually. I think I'm pretty more reasonable than others.
In the midst of it,
Yeah.
you're okay.
I think so. Look, I mentioned Dante before. I love Dante and Divine Comedy. I'm not saying we should deny our desires or suppress them or pretend that we don't have sex drives. I got red blood, man. I think that we need to sublimate our desires to the right ends and to the good place. So you say, if I'm doing the thing that men and women do with each other within the context of marriage, am I doing it in a reasonable way? I like to think I am. Meaning, is it open to life? Is it going to produce children? Is it degrading to one partner or the other? I hope it's not. Is it reasonable with
But you're
respect
assuming the
to
only reasonable way
occurrence?
to, I guess,
Procreate.
yeah, or this urge that you have, the sexual urge, is if you do it in this context.
Yes.
But that's just your assumption, I think.
No, it's the conclusion I've arrived at through reason, because I think there are ends to things. Like the end of this delicious Mayflower cigar would be for me to smoke it. The end of this cup of water
But
would
if
be
you
for me
use
to
the
drink
cup
it.
to kill a bug, are you misusing the cup?
You are misusing it. It won't kill the bug as well. I mean, I'm not saying that that's immoral necessarily, but it won't kill the bug as well as it will bring you water. And so the purpose of my eyes is to see. The purpose of my mouth is to actually to smoke cigars, but maybe to eat is a secondary purpose. And the purpose of my sexuality finds its expression in procreation, which is not going to happen between a couple of fellas or 3 dudes and a billy goat. It's going to happen within the context of marriage.
Speaking of the cup, do you need a refill?
I could.
You get a refill?
You're too kind, my dear. Thank you.
Okay.
I feel very patriarchal. That's very kind.
I do have a question for you. I just want to find out what the threshold is. Obviously, you morally condemn porn, and I guess I want to know from like your TradCon purview, do you also condemn strip clubs, prostitutes, brothels, Playboy magazine, Victoria's Secret,
especially Playboy
fashion
magazine.
shows. What about like
Victoria's Secret fashion
Angels?
shows now feature like dudes in plastic bags. So I don't even know if that's
I mean, the
sexual
traditional
anymore,
like VS Angel shows, do you condemn? Because I guess I get annoyed when people just morally burden porn stars, and I feel like it's just because of the financial component. But then they're still, like I said, going to Hooters all the time, and I feel like a lot of conservatives, especially TradCons, are okay with, you know what I mean, lusting after women in those confined settings.
I'm very
Television
opposed to lusting
pageants.
after women, and I think it's tantamount to adultery.
So you would morally condemn Hooters and Victoria's Secret fashion shows and any of those magazines?
I mean, again, there are different, obviously these are differences of degree. So Hooters, it's women wearing like tight clothing and giving you chicken wings. And I'm not saying it's ideal. I wouldn't recommend having Christmas dinner there. But, I think it's far less objectionable than, say, going to a strip club or going to the red light district or looking at pornography. The thing about pornography that's really in particularly bad about this, too, is it's so unnatural. So, on the one hand, you'd say, well, it's better to look at porn than to cheat on your wife. Wouldn't recommend doing either. But porn is even more unnatural because there's not even another person involved. It's just glittering images on a screen, and then you're doing a shameful act with yourself.
What if you were watching it with your partner? There is data out there that actually, a lot of people report watching porn together actually makes their sexual relationship better, and they report higher sexual satisfaction. In that context, do you think it's okay, or is it just immoral for you because you're a Catholic?
No, I think the reason that it's bad is, one, it would turn your sexual desire to another woman. And it would cause you to view women as sexual objects rather than as proper subjects. And I think one of the other problems with porn that shapes the way you would view all women, including your wife, is that it treats people as commodities. So what it does is it causes you to sell yourself as though you were just merely flesh, for the irrational excitement of some other person, and that is intrinsically degrading because you're a rational creature with a mind and a soul.
That's why I think OnlyFans is the best iteration of sex work, because sex work, as they say, is the world's like oldest profession. It's never going away. Like even in 2005, which is over 10 years before the advent of OnlyFans, 16% of American men were buying sex, and over half of them were doing it regularly from prostitutes. So I don't like that we blame porn when sex work has always been a thing. Even a lot of Christian men will go to the strip club like a week before getting married, and that's considered like traditionally acceptable.
Party. Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like OnlyFans is the healthiest iteration, even by your characterization, because it reinstates the soul, because the biggest OnlyFans stars are famous for their personality. People like Amaranth, Belle Delphine, Bella Thorne. It reinstates that personality. So I feel like it's actually reducing this idea of only lusting after a woman for her flesh. It's actually three-dimensionalizing her again. So do you think OnlyFans...
But it still reduces the relation of the sexes to a mere monetary transaction, and it commoditizes the woman because she's the product. So,
I mean, isn't that capitalism though? Like when you have a cashier, aren't you like objectifying
Yeah.
your
And
cashier?
isn't
there are
content
major
creation as
problems
a
with
whole?
capitalism. The cashier scenario, I don't think, is a great
But you have
analogy.
like, if you're using, like when the mechanic is working on your car, you're not like super interested in his thoughts and feelings. You're using him as a means to. So what is so bad about sexual objectification when we objectify celebrities, athletes, all these?
Because the mechanic is performing a rational and edifying action for me that benefits the two of us. A prostitute, say, is turning herself into a mere instrument for my own lower pleasure. So, I totally agree with you that prostitution's been around forever, and there have actually been moral arguments, including from St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, against prohibiting this as a matter of law too aggressively, because one might say that then society would be convulsed by lust. So you have to strongly circumscribe it, but not totally get rid of it, and I don't know. Whatever.
So you're pro OnlyFans?
I'm not pro OnlyFans.
But you think it's the healthiest iteration, or the
No,
most
I
moral
mean, you're
iteration
asking
of
me
sex
what's the
work?
least dangerous arsenic. I don't know. I guess there's some diluted form of it, but they're all deadly. They're all going to get you.
I guess I just didn't like this argument that the reason prostitution or pornography is worse than maybe like a Hooters is because it's reducing people, you said, to like glittering
Yeah, the
pixels
woman
on
at Hooters
screen.
is having a nice conversation with me and bringing me my chicken, and she's not actually stripping down, and she's not actually performing a sexual act.
I find that more immoral. I feel like that's the more reductionist flesh version of sex work, because she has to more perform a role, versus if you're subscribing to a Twitch streamer who you already like, it's based off her personality. Like she sets the rules, she sets the personality,
no, I think
she sets the interaction.
I think the audience sets the rules, really. And
no, they're subscribing more for her personality. In Hooters, it's already a predetermined role in uniform and costuming that they're assuming.
I suspect if you talk to the top earning performers on OnlyFans, they would tell you that the customer is always right. They tell you the same thing that the cashier and the
No,
waitress
I'm
would
a
tell
top.
you.
I'm a top
That's not
performer.
true.
That's not true. I have very strict boundaries. I make the rules, and
You don't take into consideration the desires of your audience. I don't believe that.
I mean,
for
so do you
one
think
second.
you're commodifying yourself to the day, like when you're doing your show on the
But
daily
the
wire?
thing that I'm selling is my opinions about the world.
Oh,
And the
I
thing
do
that
like philosophy live streams naked.
Well, I then half of that is probably a good idea. But the problem with doing it naked is it's kind of cheating, isn't it? It's cheating because you're attracting eyeballs with something that is irrational, and then maybe you're giving them some philosophy.
They don't
on the
have to
side.
be completely separate at all times. Like
Sure.
even in marriage, like when you're horny, you're not at that moment like having this deep conversation and you're so interested in their thought. Like you have you can channel that in a healthy way. So something that I found is a lot of men, when they would see me speak and they're like, I really like what you say, but now it's hard to jerk off to you because I have this weird thing. But then once they like get exposed to it, now they like, oh, actually it's really cool. I love it. Like, we might have this inclination to see
I'll have to
people
take
in
their
these
word for it, I
categories.
guess. I don't know about that.
These categories, but that it doesn't mean that just because you're a sexual object in this context that you are in every context.
Yeah, I guess it's just if you're. I think they probably make a good point, which is I have viewed you in this degraded way, and now I'm surprised to see you in a different way.
And that's
But
why it's important to expose them to that, because that's
perhaps, but even the way you're talking about sexual desire still seems to be very self-regarding, right? You're saying if you want to sleep with your wife, it's because you're randy or something. But that would be the difference between, say, love and sex. I forget who wrote this. Maybe it was Chesterton or Lewis or one of these guys. Sex is, it's Fulton Sheen actually, the Archbishop and former TV star. Sex is totally self-regarding. So when one looks at porn, it's to gratify one's own lusts.
Mm-hmm.
When one is married or just even in love, one is willing the good of the other person. And so you can, this is not just pie in the sky, mamby-pamby stuff. The result of self-regarding sex, solo or with other people, is sterility and the instrumentalization of other people for your own desires. The end result of love, which is giving to the other person, is to edify the spouse, but it literally becomes so real that another person is created as a result of it.
Pixie, go ahead.
This doesn't have to do with the porn usage, but I just want to circle back to something that's just been stuck on my mind. Earlier you were talking about basically these kind of biological imperatives that women and men have naturally fallen into, and then basically feminism is trying to destroy that. That's my understanding of your argument.
But I don't think it's just biological, because I don't think we're just bodies and flesh. I think we're also souls and bodies together.
Okay, because what I was going to say is that when people make these biological arguments of men having to be this one way and women having to be this other way, to me that doesn't necessarily follow, because we've literally had laws after law in place trying to prevent women from getting into the workforce, from having being able to open a bank account, from even being able to pursue certain legal matters. So when people make this biological argument of oh no, men are just more naturally inclined towards working roles, it would follow then that there would be no need for these laws. It would just be a biological imperative. There's no need for you to have a law where blood flows through you or where you have a heart. These are just things that are true. But when it comes to our roles in society, and I think this is what feminists push back on, it seems like instead of it being a real biological imperative, it is forced upon the social structure.
Yeah, are you suggesting that women are as happy working in an office as a man is?
They could be.
depends on the woman.
Hypothetically, I guess they could be. But do you think, talking to your female friends and looking at what social scientific data there are, you really think women are as satisfied and happy in
Some.
office work?
I definitely
I'm just
think
saying
some.
in the aggregate.
Yeah, I think.
If you're really being honest with me right now, I think you would say probably women are less happy.
But
Well,
I don't think either of them are happy.
wait.
Like, I
Yeah,
think
but
most
which is
people are
happier
not
than the
happy.
other?
Yeah,
Which is
no.
happier than
Well, what I think is interesting about this argument is that we do have like a clear period of time where, hey, you know, women were staying at home, whatever. Then when men went out to war, they went towards these jobs, and when the men came back, they didn't want to leave. So to me, to be saying like, oh no, like, you know, they're all in general happier at home. Well, we had a clear period of time where women fought expressly
Right.
against that.
No, we did, and then we, as I mentioned earlier, we measured against it, and we measured how it turned out, and all but one of the surveys showed that the women became less happy. So I'm totally willing to take these surveys with a grain of salt, but in as much as we can measure them, they undercut your argument.
No.
If there was a survey that showed that men are happier just sitting on their ass all day on like some island just
are.
watching TV,
They are in the short
do you
term.
think that they should strive towards that?
No, because they wouldn't be happier in the long term, because happiness is an objective matter. It's not purely subjective. So like men, though, truly, this is why Genesis 3 is written the way that it is. Men do not want to lord over women. They don't want to dominate women. They don't want to be knuckle draggers. You know what men want to do? They want to sit on the couch and eat potato chips and be left alone. That's what men. That's the broken, dark.
Right, I'm
part
just saying,
of
I think everyone would be
masculinity.
happier in the short term sitting at home on a couch, which is why I think those studies
No,
that you're
I don't
referring
think
to of
so.
self-reported happiness refers to that type and not eudaimonia.
I think women would be happier in the short term playing the girl boss and having all sorts of, color-coded notebooks and pens and stuff. But they would find that they don't actually like it. They don't really want to work at the law firm. They don't really want to be in the widget factory. They would rather do something that is more naturally feminine.
I think it's also interesting how you're ascribing these surveys of like self-reported happiness going lower as a result of being in the workplace. When I wonder if you start
And other things, yeah.
Exactly. I wonder if when you start looking down into the specific reasons why a person might report greater amounts of unhappiness, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that could range, right? So,
Right.
for example,
They're all feminists, though.
higher, like, let's say, experiencing like some sort of like sexual harassment in the workplace, for example, which in that case, it's not necessarily, they're less happy doing work. They're just less happy
These
experiencing
days-
sexual harassment, for example.
I'm not saying it never happens because obviously, you hear some Me Too stories, Matt Lauer, whatever, Vince McMahon. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but these days the law and the culture are so radically opposed to men and in favor of women in the situation. The frequency of sexual harassment in the workplace is basically zero.
Can you give